Well, hello. My Bible is open to Job chapter 42. Job 42. And I want to finish up the book of Job today. It's taken us 2 months to read through this book. I will tell you, as I am recording this video, today is Tuesday, March the 1st, which means we're actually starting the book of Psalms today. But I needed to do a video to wrap up the book of Job. And my schedule has not allowed me to get that done until today. This is the first opportunity that I've had to do this. So let's do Job chapter 42. And while you're turning there and you're preparing yourself to think about this chapter and where we've been, you might notice that I'm not sitting in my office at the church building. And if you are a member of our congregation, you have received an email as to why that is. We've got some construction going on at our church building this week. We've got a new roof being put on and some new HVAC units going in. There's a lot of people working at our building, and there's hammers and saws and cranes and all kinds of noise. So I am somewhere else right now, so I can do this video and I can study in some peace and quiet. So I hope that you'll get your Bible and read along with me from Job chapter 42. And I hope to, sometime soon, I'm not sure when, but hopefully very soon, I can put together a video to help us prepare for the book of Psalms, which is what we are actually beginning today on March 1st. Also, we have our 31 Days of Prayer initiative beginning today. And so get out your schedule and look at that and be praying about each item every day as we do that together congregationally beginning today, March 1st. I teased a little bit in my last video when God was speaking to Job and asking him all of these questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And do you understand why these animals do the things that they do, and can you explain why the stars in the heavens do the things that they do? And of course, the answer in all of that is no. Job is not able to explain any of that, and I gave you one reason why I think God was asking Job those questions. And I said in the last video that, in a sense, this is God putting Job in his place. But I told you that there was another reason why I think God was taking this approach with Job. Certainly, God doesn't have to explain himself to any man. That's what Job wanted. Job felt like God was being unfair to him. And he said repeatedly throughout the book, I wish I could just speak to God and make my case. I want God to explain to me why he's let these things happen to me. Well, God doesn't have to explain himself to anybody. God knows things that Job does not, and that becomes very clear beginning in chapter 38 when God asks Job all of these questions. Can you explain such and such? And Job can't explain any of that. There's a lot of things that we know through modern science and technology, but there's still a lot of things that we cannot explain, things that only God ultimately knows. But I don't think God was just taking this approach with Job to say, you sit down and you be quiet, and how dare you ever question me? I don't know that God is taking that attitude in the same way that we as humans might do that to a fellow human being. I realize God is ultimately saying to Job, you need to sit down and be quiet. You need to let me be God, and you need to do what I've called you to do, and that is be faithful to me. Don't lose your faith in the midst of trial. But I don't sense God taking this defensive and how dare you, kind of mentality that we oftentimes take with our fellow man. But there's something else that's going on in these questions. And I think this is really important. So let's read chapter 42, Job's response to the Lord. Verse 1, Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything. and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wondrous for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak, and when I question you, you will inform me. I had heard reports about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I reject my words and am sorry for them, and I am dust and ashes, or I repent in dust and ashes. Job says, God, you came in chapter 38 when you began your speech and you said, I'm going to ask you some questions now, Job, and you answer me if you know the answers. You speak to me and you tell me, do you understand these things? And here Job says in summation, I don't understand any of it. These are all things that are too wondrous for me. Job admits here what sometimes we struggle to admit. And that is that there are some things that are simply above and beyond our level of knowledge. Job says, there are things that I don't understand, things that I just need to leave to you, God. Job's friends were trying to explain what they understood. Well, Job, all these bad things have happened to you, and here's why. Let's give you our explanations as to why. And as we've said many times, they really had no idea what was actually going on. They were speaking above their level of knowledge. And when we do that, when we say, well, let me tell you what God is doing in this scenario, we really find ourselves swimming in some deep, deep water there. And we need to be very careful about trying to make an effort to do that. And so Job says, these were things that I did not understand, and I'm sorry that I said these things, as he says in verse 7. Verse 6, I reject those words. I'm sorry that I have said them. Now, verse 7. After the Lord finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Now take 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer a burnt offering for yourselves. Then my servant Job will pray for you. I will surely accept his prayer and not deal with you as your folly deserves. For you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. Then Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. 2 times God says to the friends, you have not spoken correctly in the way that Job has. And you might say, well, wait a minute. Didn't we say throughout the book that Job said some things about God that were not true? And certainly the answer to that is yes. I understand this to be referring to verses 1 through 6 of chapter 42. That's what God is referring to when he says, my servant Job has spoken things about me that are true. He's not talking about all the previous things that Job has said. Well, some of the things that Job said would certainly be true of God. But I think he's talking about the first part of this chapter when he says that. And so Job intercedes for these 3 friends. Their sacrifices are given and he prays for them, and God hears his prayer. Now, verse 10. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and doubled his previous possessions. All his brothers, sisters, and former acquaintances came to him and dined with him in his house. They sympathized with him and comforted him concerning all the adversity the Lord had brought on him. Each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold earring. Notice it says that in verse 11 that the former acquaintances came to Job and they dined with him and they comforted him and so forth. Contrast that with what Job says in chapter 30. You remember reading chapters 29 and 30. Job said in chapter 29, he was thinking back before all of this adversity. And in chapter 29, he says, there was a time when all of the people in the city, they came and they showed me respect and honor. And specifically verse 7 of chapter 29 and following, he talks about the people of the city were, they looked up to him. They esteemed Job because they knew he was a man of integrity. They knew he was a man of wealth and power, in a sense. And so the people respected him. But then in chapter 30, he says, now they mock me and they look at me as if I'm just this awful person because of these bad things that have happened to me. But now those same people, it seems, are coming back to Job again and honoring him once again. But I want you to notice back in chapter 42, I want you to notice a very significant expression in verse 11. They sympathized with him and comforted him concerning all the adversity the Lord had brought on him. God, it says, brought these things upon Job. You say, now wait a minute. Chapter 1, chapter 2 says that the devil brought these things upon Job. And that's true. And we say when we look at those chapters, well, God permitted Satan to do these things to Job. And that's right. But this text says that God brought these things on Job. Is that a conflict there? Is the first two chapters saying one thing and this chapter saying something different? No. Because the fact is, God chooses to allow the things that he allows. And this is one of those big ideas, like I was talking about before, where we can easily get beyond our level of knowledge. Whether God permits something or allows something, he still makes a choice to permit it or allow it. And so that's how I understand that expression there in verse 11. I'm going to skip over verses 12 through 15, but just to say at the beginning of verse 12, the Lord blessed the last part of Job's life more than the first. And then he goes to enumerate the ways that he did that. The oxen, the sheep, the children, and he says Job's daughters were more beautiful than all of the other daughters in the land and so forth. Then verse 16, let's close this out. Job lived 140 years after this and saw his children and their children to the fourth generation. Then Job died old and full of days. After these events, he lived another 140 years. And then he died. I want to look at one other passage, and then I want to come back to where this video started, which is, what is the other thing that is going on when God is asking Job all of these questions? There is a New Testament passage that mentions Job. I'm going to James chapter 5. This is a significant commentary in helping us understand what Job is all about. In James chapter 5, we're going to look at verse 10, James chapter 5 and verse 10, and then let's conclude our thoughts on this wonderful book of Job. James chapter 5 and verse 10, brothers and sisters, take the prophets who spoke in the Lord's name as an example of suffering and patience. See, we count them as blessed, those who have endured. Okay, there's some words I want to call your attention to in these verses. Suffering, patience, endurance. Now look at verse 11, the second part of the verse. You have heard of Job's endurance and have seen the outcome that the Lord brought about. What are we to take away from the book of Job? And James says this is what we should take away. That the Lord is compassionate and merciful. The Lord is compassionate and merciful. Why is the Lord compassionate and merciful? There's literally hundreds of reasons that I suppose we could give. But when we talk about the book of Job, and we say the book of Job is a book about human suffering, that's true to a point. But that's not all that it's about. The book of Job is, in large measure, a book about retaining faith in the midst of suffering. Holding on to your faith. Job does that throughout the book. Yes, there are times when he wavers a little bit. There are times when he questions and he's angry. But there are also times in the book where he, and I'm paraphrasing Job's thoughts, but he basically says, I've lost everything, but I still have God. And even if there's nothing else in this life that I can hold on to, I still have God. And that doesn't mean I have all the answers. That doesn't mean that it's not hard for me to cling with God, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick it through with him. And God shows his compassion and his mercy upon Job throughout the book. But clearly we see it at the end of the book in chapter 42. So what is God doing in all of these questions that he asks, chapters 38 through 41? Again, there is an element of God saying, I need to put you in your place. But the other thing that I think is going on that is really important, when we come to chapter 42, as we've read today, and Job says, God, you told me you were going to ask me these questions and that I should answer you. I can't answer you. These are things that are too far beyond my ability to grasp. Then what I see from that God is doing in asking Job all of these questions and making Job realize that he doesn't understand what all is happening. Job doesn't understand these things that God is asking him. Is that not an implicit way of God saying, now Job, I've just taken you from the creation to all of these things that I have made and all of these creatures which I have made and all of this, you've said that you cannot understand it. Now, if I'm looking after all of this and I am able to understand and control and manipulate all of this in the creation, if the universe is literally in the palms of my hands and I care for all of these things, Job, don't you think I can take care of you too? Don't you think I can be there for you? Don't you think I'm in control of what's happening to you? Why don't you let me be God and take care of the things that I am capable of taking care of? You, Job, need to do the one thing that I am asking you to do, and that is what Satan accused you of not being able to do in the first 2 chapters of the book. And that is to serve me and be faithful to me, even though you have no blessings, as it were. When you can't explain everything that's going on, Job, what you can understand, what you can explain is what I've asked you to do. And that is to keep your faith in me and trust me. And if I can do all of this over here, if I can understand the creation, and I can understand the movements of the stars and the planets and all of these things, I've got all that under control. I need you to trust that I've got your life and your situation under control too. And beloved, I think that's a very great faith-building thought for us. So, Thank you for studying along with me today. I hope it's been a blessing to you to go through the book of Job.